I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change.
In a moment that stunned royal watchers and ignited whispers across palace corridors, Prince William stepped forward with a resolve few had ever seen, seizing authority not with spectacle, but with calculated precision, a quiet shift that would redefine power inside the monarchy forever. The atmosphere had already grown tense around King Charles III, whose declining strength made continuity essential, yet no one expected the speed and decisiveness that followed. Within hours, structures long considered untouchable began to move, and the influence surrounding Queen Camilla was suddenly under scrutiny, not through rumor, but through documents, oversight, and authority backed by law. William's actions were deliberate, methodical, and coldly efficient. Meetings took place behind heavy doors, signatures were secured, and emergency powers were activated, giving him operational control over finances, security, and internal governance. What emerged next shocked even seasoned insiders, a sweeping effort to restore accountability, with audits launched, privileges revoked, and long-standing arrangements questioned in ways the monarchy had never experienced. The transformation was immediate. Aides whispered, staff shifted loyalties, and palace routines hardened into disciplined procedure. William's message was unmistakable. Tradition would no longer shield misuse, and personal relationships would not override institutional responsibility. Critics called it ruthless. Supporters called it necessary. Yet beneath the political maneuvering lay something more human, a son determined to protect his father, a future king redefining duty, and an institution forced to confront the cost of secrecy. As authority consolidated around William, the monarchy appeared to enter a new era, one built not on quiet deference, but on oversight and transparency, raising a powerful question that echoed beyond palace walls. Had the crown just witnessed the most decisive internal shift in modern royal history, and would this bold intervention strengthen the institution, or expose fractures too deep to heal? The ripple effects of that decisive intervention continued to spread with astonishing speed, and insiders began to sense that this was not a temporary adjustment but a fundamental recalibration of royal authority led by Prince William himself. Advisors close to King Charles III described a period of quiet urgency where every decision carried the weight of legacy, stability, and public trust. The future king reportedly insisted on stricter transparency, demanding detailed briefings on operations that had for decades remained shielded by tradition. At the same time, conversations surrounding the role of Queen Camilla grew more cautious, as William's restructuring tightened oversight across departments previously influenced by personal alliances. Staff members who had grown comfortable under informal arrangements suddenly found themselves navigating a far more disciplined environment, where accountability replaced familiarity and protocol replaced discretion. The shift was subtle to the outside world but unmistakable within palace walls. Schedules were tightened, communication lines streamlined, and decision-making centralized under William's supervision. Observers noted that his leadership style blended modern management with royal restraint, avoiding public confrontation while quietly consolidating authority. Yet the emotional undercurrent remained powerful, a son stepping forward not out of ambition, but necessity, determined to protect the crown during a moment of vulnerability. Supporters praised the move as evidence of readiness for the throne, pointing to his calm demeanor and calculated restraint as signs of a leader prepared for the burdens ahead. Critics, however, questioned whether such decisive control risked unsettling delicate relationships within the royal household, potentially creating tensions that could surface later. Still, William appeared unfazed, focusing on long-term stability rather than short-term approval. As reports of internal reforms continued to surface, royal watchers began to speculate that this moment might mark the beginning of a generational transition, where the monarchy evolved from tradition-bound secrecy to measured openness. The image of unity remained intact publicly, yet behind the scenes, the message was clear. Responsibility now carried sharper edges, and the future of the crown would be shaped by discipline, not sentiment. In that quiet but powerful shift, the monarchy seemed to enter unfamiliar territory, guided by a prince who understood that preserving history sometimes requires rewriting the rules, and who was willing to bear the weight of that transformation with steady resolve that as the days unfolded, the atmosphere surrounding Prince William's growing authority became even more pronounced, and observers began to recognize that this was not simply a reaction to circumstances but a carefully measured evolution of leadership. Those close to King Charles III describe a quiet understanding between father and son, one rooted in continuity and responsibility rather than urgency alone. William reportedly spent long hours reviewing briefings, examining institutional structures, and consulting senior advisors, all while maintaining the calm public demeanor that has long defined his approach. Meanwhile, discussions surrounding the influence of Queen Camilla continued to circulate, not in dramatic confrontations, but in subtle adjustments to protocol, oversight, and communication channels. Departments that once operated with considerable independence were now expected to provide regular reports, and the tone inside the palace shifted from informal familiarity to measured professionalism. Staff members noted that William's leadership emphasized clarity, with expectations outlined precisely and responsibilities reassigned where necessary. The transformation did not happen overnight, but each small decision built toward a larger redefinition of how authority functioned within the royal household. Publicly, the monarchy remained composed, projecting unity and stability, yet insiders sense a disciplined recalibration underway. Supporters interpreted William's actions as a sign of readiness for kingship, pointing to his steady judgment and willingness to confront difficult realities. Critics, however, wondered whether such assertiveness might create unseen tensions, particularly in an institution historically guided by delicate balance. Still, William appeared focused on long-term preservation rather than immediate perception, prioritizing structural strength over popularity. The emotional dimension remained compelling, a son stepping forward to safeguard both family and institution, aware that history often judges leaders not by comfort but by courage. As speculation about generational change intensified, many began to view this period as a turning point, one where tradition and modernization intersected. The monarchy, long associated with continuity, now seemed to be quietly adapting, guided by a future king determined to reinforce its foundations. In that unfolding narrative, William's measured authority signaled something deeper than temporary control. It suggested a philosophy of leadership built on accountability, restraint, and resolve. And as the palace adjusted to this new rhythm, one question lingered in the air. Was this the moment the modern monarchy truly began to take shape, shaped by a prince who understood that protecting legacy sometimes means embracing transformation? The deeper the transition unfolded, the more evident it became that Prince William was not merely stepping into a temporary leadership role, but quietly redefining the operational heartbeat of the modern monarchy. Conversations inside the royal household reportedly shifted from ceremonial priorities to structural resilience, with long-term planning taking precedence over tradition for tradition's sake. Those close to King Charles III suggested that the king, aware of the pressures facing the institution, welcomed his son's steady involvement, seeing it not as a challenge but as continuity. At the same time, the position of Queen Camilla became part of a broader conversation about influence, optics, and the delicate balance between personal relationships and institutional authority. Rather than dramatic confrontations, the shift appeared through procedural refinements, committees reorganized, reporting lines clarified, and communication filtered through more formal channels. Staff members described a noticeable change in tone, fewer informal decisions, more documented processes, and a renewed emphasis on accountability. William's approach combined calm diplomacy with firm expectations, ensuring that adjustments felt orderly rather than abrupt. Royal watchers noted that this method preserved stability while still allowing meaningful reform, a balance few leaders managed successfully. Publicly, engagements continued with familiar grace, projecting unity and confidence, yet insiders sense a disciplined transformation beneath the surface. Supporters argue that William's measured leadership reflected a deep understanding of modern expectations, where transparency and responsibility are essential for public trust. Critics, meanwhile, speculated about whether such structural tightening might alter long-standing dynamics within the household. Still, the future king appeared focused on durability over comfort, emphasizing that the monarchy must evolve to remain relevant. The emotional dimension of the moment remained compelling. A son preparing to inherit not just a crown, but a complex institution shaped by centuries of precedent. As this quiet recalibration continued, analysts began to interpret it as a defining chapter, marking the emergence of a leadership style grounded in practicality and foresight. The monarchy, once seen as immovable, now appeared capable of careful adaptation, guided by a prince willing to shoulder responsibility early. In that steady transformation, the message became unmistakable. Authority in the modern era would depend not only on lineage, but on discipline, clarity, and the courage to refine tradition without abandoning it. And as the palace settled into this new rhythm, many wondered whether history would look back on this period as a moment the future king stepped fully into his role, not through proclamation, but through quiet, decisive stewardship that reshaped the institution from within. As the weeks stretched on, the steady transformation guided by Prince William began to feel less like an internal adjustment and more like the emergence of a new governing philosophy for the monarchy itself. Insiders spoke of a shift in tone that extended beyond logistics, touching the very culture of decision-making. Meetings once dominated by ceremonial planning reportedly began to include strategic discussions about public trust, modernization, and long-term stability. Close observers of King Charles III suggested that the king valued this evolution, recognizing that the institution must adapt while preserving its core identity. At the same time, the role of Queen Camilla was viewed within this broader framework, not as a focal point of conflict, but as part of a recalibrated structure designed to clarify responsibilities and maintain balance. Staff described a more disciplined rhythm to palace life, where expectations were communicated clearly and decisions documented carefully, reinforcing a sense of collective accountability. William's leadership style remained understated, relying on consultation and measured judgment rather than public declarations. Yet the cumulative effect of these changes was unmistakable, a monarchy quietly reshaping itself to meet contemporary expectations. Supporters praised the emphasis on transparency and responsibility, interpreting it as evidence of readiness for the future. Critics wondered whether the tightening of structure might reduce the flexibility that once defined royal operations. Still, William appeared focused on durability, emphasizing that tradition must be supported by sound governance. The emotional dimension of this period remained compelling, a son stepping forward not only to support his father, but to prepare the institution for the challenges ahead. Analysts began to describe the moment as a subtle generational transition, where leadership evolves gradually rather than through sudden declaration. Public appearances continue to project unity, yet beneath the surface, the monarchy seemed to be entering a new era shaped by careful planning and deliberate reform. In that quiet transformation, William's steady hand suggested a vision grounded in accountability, continuity, and respect for history. As the palace adjusted to this new cadence, observers wondered whether this would ultimately be remembered as a turning point when the future king demonstrated that leadership in the modern age is not defined by ceremony alone, but by the willingness to strengthen foundations, refine tradition, and guide an ancient institution toward a more resilient future. The longer this quiet transformation continued, the clearer it became that Prince William was shaping not only immediate decisions but the long-term philosophy of royal leadership, carefully balancing continuity with modernization. Observers noted that his approach emphasized preparation, ensuring that every structural adjustment served a broader vision of stability. Those close to King Charles III described an atmosphere of thoughtful collaboration, where father and son exchanged perspectives on how best to preserve the monarchy's credibility in a rapidly changing world. At the same time, the evolving position of Queen Camilla remained part of the wider recalibration, reflecting a desire to clarify responsibilities without creating public tension. Departments inside the palace reportedly began operating with renewed discipline. Communication became more structured, and long-term planning gained prominence over reactive decision-making. William's leadership was defined by patience and precision, allowing reforms to take hold gradually while maintaining the outward appearance of unity. Supporters viewed this steady method as a sign of maturity, highlighting his focus on sustainability rather than spectacle. Critics, however, speculated about whether deeper institutional changes might eventually test established relationships. Yet William appeared committed to strengthening the monarchy's foundations, recognizing that public confidence depends on accountability and consistency. The emotional undertone remained powerful, a future king stepping forward not for recognition, but to safeguard an institution tied to history and national identity. Analysts increasingly interpreted the period as a subtle generational shift, one unfolding through deliberate action rather than dramatic announcement. Public engagements continue with familiar dignity, but behind the scenes, the monarchy's operational culture seemed to be evolving. In that measured progression, William's influence suggested a leadership style grounded in responsibility, foresight, and respect for tradition. As this new rhythm settled in, observers wondered whether this moment would ultimately be remembered as the beginning of a modern era for the crown, where authority is defined not only by heritage but by the willingness to adapt, refine, and guide an ancient institution through complexities of the present with calm determination and quiet resolve that as this period of quiet consolidation continued. The influence of Prince William seemed to extend beyond internal management and into the broader perception of what the monarchy should represent in the 21st century. Observers began noting how his measured approach reflected an understanding that public trust is no longer secured by tradition alone, but by consistency, accountability, and clarity. Those close to King Charles III described thoughtful discussions about legacy, with the king reportedly encouraging a steady transition of responsibilities to ensure continuity without disruption. Within that framework, the role of Queen Camilla remained part of the evolving structure, framed less as a personal dynamic and more as an institutional balance designed to reinforce stability. Inside the palace, staff members spoke of a more organized rhythm, decision-making timelines tightened, reporting procedures formalized, and communication channels streamlined. These adjustments, though subtle, created a sense that the monarchy was quietly preparing for future challenges, guided by careful planning rather than reactive measures. William's leadership style remained deliberately understated, favoring consultation and consensus while still asserting clear expectations. Supporters interpreted this calm authority as evidence of readiness for kingship, pointing to his ability to navigate complex relationships without public conflict. Critics wondered whether gradual reform might encounter resistance over time, yet even they acknowledged the discipline underlying the approach. The emotional dimension of the moment continued to resonate, a son stepping forward to support his father while also preparing to inherit a centuries-old institution. Analysts increasingly described the period as a formative chapter where tradition and modernization intersected in a controlled and deliberate manner. Public appearances maintained a sense of unity, but behind the scenes, the operational culture appeared more focused, more strategic, and more resilient. In that steady evolution, William's role suggested a broader vision, a monarchy rooted in history yet capable of adaptation, preserving dignity while embracing responsible governance. As the palace adjusted to this new cadence, many wondered whether future historians would identify this quiet recalibration as a turning point when the next generation began shaping the crown, not through dramatic declarations, but through patient, thoughtful stewardship that reinforced stability while guiding the institution toward a more transparent and durable future. Gradually, the impact of these steady adjustments began to ripple outward, reinforcing the perception that Prince William was shaping not just internal procedures but the long-term identity of the monarchy itself. Observers noticed that his presence in key discussions increased, and with it came a more strategic tone that emphasized planning, resilience, and public confidence. Those close to King Charles III suggested that the king valued this measured support, viewing it as a continuation of duty rather than a transfer of power. Meanwhile, the evolving responsibilities surrounding Queen Camilla were interpreted within a broader effort to clarify roles and ensure operational balance, minimizing ambiguity while preserving unity. Inside the palace, staff reportedly adapted to a more structured environment, where timelines were defined and accountability emphasized. Decisions once handled informally were increasingly documented, reinforcing a sense of professional governance. William's leadership remained calm and deliberate, avoiding dramatic gestures while steadily reinforcing expectations. Supporters pointed to this restraint as evidence of maturity, suggesting that lasting reform often emerges through patience rather than spectacle. Critics questioned whether such gradual change might mask deeper tensions, yet even they acknowledged the discipline guiding the process. The emotional undercurrent remained compelling, a future king preparing to inherit not only tradition but responsibility. Analysts described the period as a quiet but meaningful shift, where modernization unfolded through careful stewardship. Public engagement continued with familiar composure, projecting continuity, while behind the scenes the monarchy's operational culture grew more focused. In that measured evolution, William's influence suggested a vision rooted in accountability, respect for history, and readiness for the future. As this new rhythm settled, observers wondered whether this chapter would ultimately be remembered as a moment when leadership quietly transitioned toward a model defined by stability, clarity, and the courage to adapt without abandoning the enduring traditions that define the crown.